Chapter 257. Are you really going to just ignore everything like this? Approaching the door with footsteps as light as breath, he heard a low, drawn-out voice echoing through the thick wood. He pressed his forehead against the crack of the door, squinting through the narrow opening. Inside the spacious study, a man with faded pale blonde hair was lazily leaning back in a soft velvet armchair. Standing before him was a middle-aged man whose tone carried unconcealed opposition. You know better than anyone how dangerous magical beasts are. Perhaps that beast isn't a concern right now, but in just a few years, it will become so vicious it will be uncontrollable. We must act before that happens. Darian. The man leaning against the back of the chair spoke up. His deep voice rang out, while his eyes never left the documents in his hands. Do I have to repeat myself twice for you to understand? Hearing that voice, the shoulders of the man voicing the opposition twitched sharply and stiffened. Turning to another page, the cold lord continued, I will say this one last time. Let her do what she wants. But she will eventually get bored of it anyway. When the time comes, I will handle it myself. So do not mention another word about this matter. After a moment of hesitation, the other man finally bowed his head and slowly turned to leave. Instantly, he backed away from the door, hiding himself behind a stone pillar just as the subordinate stepped into the hallway. Holding his breath as he watched the retreating back of the subordinate disappear into the distance, he quietly returned closer to the study. Inside, the lord leaned his head back against the chair cushion, using 2 fingers to lightly massage the bridge of his nose. He looked utterly exhausted. He narrowed his eyes slightly. Was there ever a time when I wore an expression like that? With his messy hair pushed back, the man stared blankly into the empty space with weary and bored eyes. That face was empty, frighteningly lonely. Only when seeing this appearance with his own eyes did he truly understand what the emotions he once carried in the past were. Even if the other person didn't realize it himself, he was definitely feeling pain. Ever since the day he left her, he hadn't had a single day of peace. And yet, only after he disappeared did she find the tranquility she had always desired. Just as she had once said. As long as she no longer had to see him, she would be fine. The lifeless eyes that had been staring at the ceiling slowly shifted toward the window frame. He knew very well what he was remembering as he gazed up at that moon. The memory of the night holding her in his arms under the blue moonlight only made him sink deeper into loneliness. Resting his elbows on the armrests, the man pressed hard against his temples and finally stood up. He immediately hid himself. For a long time, apart from the sound of the wind battering the glass window panes, there was no other sound. It wasn't until the sound of footsteps gradually faded away that he guessed he had gone to the adjacent bedroom to rest. Keeping his breath incredibly soft, he waited a little longer before carefully pushing the door and stepping into the study. The room submerged in darkness appeared faintly before his eyes. Retracting his sharp claws, he silently crossed the room and approached the desk. True to its owner's obsessive need for control, the desk was perfectly organized without a single flaw. Lightly stroking the polished wooden surface that didn't hold a single speck of dust, he ducked his head under the desk, searching for the secret latch installed inside. The metal gears engaging with each other let out a very faint clicking sound. With his strength, he could easily break it open. But he couldn't leave any trace. If that man discovered a missing key, he would immediately track down the culprit and replace all the locks in the castle. Popping his head out, he carefully began to turn the intricate clockwork mechanism attached to the drawer's metal plate. Operating a delicate machine with the paws of a wild beast was much harder than he had imagined. After dozens of attempts, the drawer finally popped open. Inside was a heavy keyring with dozens of keys of all kinds. He grabbed them in his mouth and used his head to push the drawer back to its original position. A click echoed as the lock automatically engaged. That was the storage for spare keys, only used when the primary ones were lost. Unless an extraordinary situation occurred, no one would touch it for a long time. That meant the loss of one key wouldn't be discovered anytime soon. Holding the keyring tightly in his mouth, he tiptoed out of the study. It was quite a long time later when he returned to her room. Entering the room with the softest steps possible, he gazed at her sleeping face, then skillfully pushed the keyring deep under the bed. This would be a form of insurance. Thanks to these keys, he could take her out of the castle before the Zeramite army invaded. Of course, they could still use the castle's emergency escape tunnels, but when it came to fleeing, the more options they had, the better. After pushing the keyring deep inside, he crawled back out and propped his front paws on the edge of the bed. But upon realizing his fur was covered in dust, he changed his mind and turned toward the chair by the window. With just one graceful leap, he landed on the soft velvet cushion. Through the transparent glass, the full moon tinged with blue light appeared clearly before his eyes. The memory of the night holding her under the moonlight instantly rushed back, vivid and heartbreakingly real. In his entire life, had there ever been a moment happier than that? Perhaps what you truly want is just to find the happiest moment of your life again. The words from her diary suddenly appeared in his mind. Perhaps it was the same for him. That day was the most radiant fragment of time in his entire long, drawn-out life. It was just a pity that it was a truth he only realized after everything had passed. Carrying a piercing pain through his chest, he gazed at the moon for a while longer before turning his head back toward her. Even though he himself would never be able to hold the happiness of that day in his hands again, she still had a chance. She had to be happy once more. It absolutely had to be that way. I heard that the Grand Duke will be leaving for the northern border again around next week. Talia Roem carefully brought it up while rubbing mint oil on her legs. Talia was lying on the bed, stroking Khan's soft fur. Hearing that, her body slightly stiffened. Pretending not to notice that reaction, Talia Roem continued in a casual tone, I received news that the war situation in the north is becoming increasingly tense. It might not be until the end of the windy season that he returns. Did I ask you? Talia replied irritably, yanking her leg away from the healer's hands. Talia Roem watched her intently for a moment before wiping her hands with a clean, wet towel. I heard there will be a simple farewell banquet tonight. I just thought that the madam should also consider making a brief appearance. If I have overstepped my bounds, please forgive me. Talia didn't answer, she just quietly sat up. Khan, who had been lying pressed closely against her, also immediately raised his head. Hugging the increasingly heavy wolf into her arms, she slipped her feet into her slippers and grumbled, "It's too stifling. I want to go outside for some fresh air." "I will go with you." Talia pretended not to hear and just walked straight toward the door, but when she realized Talia Roem wasn't following immediately, she snapped her head back and yelled in frustration, "What are you still standing there for? Hurry up and follow me." The healer let out a gentle laugh, grabbed a summer coat, and draped it over her shoulders. "Why don't you try going to the outskirts today to take a look? I heard the knights are holding their promotion matches. It must be very lively." "Why should I go see something so noisy and barbaric? I heard that the Grand Duke will also personally participate." Talia immediately threw her an annoyed glare. Lately, Talia Roem's attitude, as if seeing through every deepest thought in her heart, really made her incredibly frustrated. With an unhappy expression, she muttered, "I'll just go through the motions and take a look." Talia Roem smiled warmly, carefully adjusting the coat on her shoulders. Holding Khan tightly against her chest, Talia stepped out of the room. As she walked down the stairs and left the main keep, the harsh sunlight instantly pierced straight into her eyes. She crossed the lush, vibrant garden, breathing in the humid air filled with the scent of grass and blooming flowers. Walking along the straight path for a long time, a resounding clamor unexpectedly drifted over. Talia startled and stopped on the stone steps, looking down at the massive training ground. On the other side of the open field, hundreds of men were gathered in a dense crowd. Her eyes widened in shock. All of them were bare-chested, with only a thin tunic draped over their suntanned skin. In the Roem Imperial capital, promotion matches were always solemn ceremonies conducted under strict knightly rules. The knights would wear full, heavy iron armor when sparring, and the audience would be dressed in formal attire. But the Eastern warriors seemed to conduct their tests in a completely different way. Without carrying any weapons at all, the men stepped into the arena and immediately engaged in barehanded brawls. Talia instinctively took a step back. What the hell are they doing? Barehanded fighting. This is the most ancient method for Eastern warriors to test their martial skills. Talia's mouth fell open. The scene was barbaric far beyond anything she had imagined. Right at that moment, a muscular man threw a fist wrapped in white bandages at his opponent's jaw. The other man stumbled and lost his balance. Seizing the opportunity, the brawler immediately drove his knee into his opponent's stomach, then ruthlessly twisted the man's arm behind his back and slammed him hard against the ground. Roars of cheering erupted like thunder from all sides. She hurriedly covered Khan's eyes with her hands. How awful! How can something so brutal and stupid like this be called a promotion match? She poured out a barrage of dissatisfied criticism, then suddenly fell silent. Amidst the crowd pressing against the fence, she saw Varkas. He, too, was wearing only a single black silk tunic draped loosely over his bare upper body. While she was still unconsciously staring in a daze, he took off the shirt slung over his shoulder, handed it to a servant, and lightly jumped over the fence. She unwittingly took a sharp breath. Under the fiery summer sun, his flawless upper body appeared like a marble statue meticulously sculpted by the gods. Carrying an aura of absolute composure and confidence, he strode toward a man who was significantly more massive in stature than himself.